I'm Mark Drew. I'm going to be talking about GraphQL. I run a company called Command. We are a consultancy based in Greenwich. We do web development. We've been doing a lot of stuff with Node, Meteor. We specialize in Core Fusion. I know no one does that, but we do, and we get all the money because we specialize in it. We've been providing consultancy and lead developer support. So basically, we're not kind of contractors. We actually come in and train your team up. We make your teams better. We tell you how to do stuff better. And we've been kind of full stack before there was a difference between the front end and the back end. You're a web developer. We manage team, we manage existing applications, and I kind of get paid as well on the side of doing all of that, as well as that, is to do a bit of R&D for clients, do proofs of concepts, and look into technologies. And one of the technologies that I kind of look into is whatever we're talking about today, GraphQL. As well as lots of other technologies. So I'm not a specialist in this, but I could, you sing it, I can whistle it and sing a song to it. Anyway, let's go on. So what we're talking about is REST. Who has used a REST, an API, a REST API? Nearly all of us, right? It's not a tough question. Who has created an API, a REST-based API? So most people here. Thankfully, for the last decade, REST has been one of the kind of the rule in the roost in APIs, rather than SOAP web services, because they should die. They should kill it with fire right now. But that's another story. As you know, in REST, a server defines a resource that a client can request, right? A person, a blog, something like that. And it has advantage about the way it's done because it's just a URL. Because the resources are obvious, right? It's a person/ID. And it's cacheable because you can put like a front-end proxy in front of it and just cache those resources and tell them when to expire. You can do a lot of beautiful things with HTTP to do your APIs and make your APIs rich, right? So very simple example, we go /user/1. What do? You get a user with an ID of 1. Or maybe the first user. I don't know, depends what the 1 means. But you have to read the doc, which always docs are so well written, right? REST is such a good format, but the docs are never well written. So for example, we could do /users1, first user, get me his posts. So that's another individual resource that I'm trying to get from REST. You know all of this. And if I go to /users1, get posts 37, is get the post specifically there, right? There are many nuances about the REST specification, but you get the basic idea. You just go and get that. The server is defining the structure of the resource that are available to you. And it also defines what it comes back to you. Well, that's all well and good. That's a way forward. It's much better than SOAP, right? But what are the problems with this? Well, first off, it's too bloated. Let's take an example. I want to get a 140-character tweet. Has anyone done that? Has anyone used the Twitter API? It's one of the first APIs that were kind of really around, right? The server has defined what I want to get, and what do I get? I get a whole bunch of stuff, right? I get all of that. That's for 140 characters, I get all of that, right? So that's not kind of a good thing. I only wanted the name of the guy and what he said, and maybe the date. And also it happens that you get too many HTTP requests, right? So you get a post, and then you see which posts they have. Then you want to go and get individual posts because it might have comments in them. So you do another request that goes and gets each individual post. And then for each individual post, you have comments. So you can go to the comments resource and go and get all the comments for that post. It starts getting really bloated, right? So you have a whole bunch of HTTP requests that with HTTP 1 includes a whole bunch of round tripping. Okay, and HTTP 2 is going to be much better because you don't have all this content negotiation, but anyways, too much stuff, right? And you can do stuff like nesting objects inside each other, but that's not really, that's not REST, is it? Because a user with a whole bunch of his tweets nested inside, you have a limitation on the tweets. And that's not a uniform resource, so it's kind of getting away from the idea of REST. So it's kind of like it works, but it's cheating. You asking, or are you just waving? Okay. So you end up with endpoints that don't describe a single resource, but rather a specific kind of query, right? If you look at the Twitter API, that's got loads of them. And it's really funny they keep on mentioning Twitter because GraphQL is developed by Facebook, which is not Twitter. And if you change any of the way your API works, what happens? You have to now version it. Yay, party time. So For example, how about nested queries? So if I go and get a user one, but now I want to get all his friends as well. So then you have to say, well, actually get user with friends. So these are two queries. I go and get a user, get a list of his friends. So these are, or you can then do this kind of format of, well, also include the friends, but only their names. And then it starts extending, and now you have to write more documentation, which we know how good at writing that you are. So, and then you get into versioning. So let's just adding stuff to your API is not problematic per se, because hey, no one's using it, right? So for example, in this, if you can see it at the back, basically I'm getting a book, an author. So my prints, can you see it? Can you all see it? Yep. Or I can read it, curly bracket, author. No. So if you add something like categories, that's fine, right? None of your clients are using the categories, that's okay. But let's say if I wanted to change the format that publish.dat was and put it like in ISO like 8601 format so that everyone can parse it much easier rather than this silly format GMT -8 blah blah blah. If I change this, what's going to happen? Right, so my clients or my old clients are going to get angry or not, or I just have to like support it and create a now V2 version of my API that just happens to have this. And if you step back a little bit and say, well, we've got continual deployment, we've got many changes, we have big ways of changing and refactoring our app, now you can't. Now you have to leave this old legacy code, including the backend database and blah, 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 running whilst you create your V2 or V3, V4, V5, V4.475 version, and it becomes madness, right? So those are the problems that REST kind of gives you. And then with every technology that comes by, it comes to solve some problems, but it brings some problems in its way. So this leads us to GraphQL, a technology by Facebook, who know a little bit about APIs and data. Well, I guess they would. Essentially, it's a query language for APIs like SQL was for SQL databases. It's kind of two things, and I'll be going through that. One is a language specification. So it's not a technology per se, it's a way of querying things and what you expect to come back at you. And the other is a way to implement that specification on your server. So it's an endpoint, right? So they've done technology that allows you to do that, implement that. So Facebook, back in 2012, I don't know if you remember this, they made a mobile phone, a mobile app that was actually based on web views, so it's like either PhoneGap type based kind of thing, right? And they were all pushing about that. Apple was pushing about it, saying this is all great, blah, blah, blah. But as it became more complicated, more complex, more features were being added, basically it was just wrapping web views, right? So even though it looked like an app, it was actually just calling the web, essentially. And it's begun to suffer massive performance problems and frequent crashes, right? So Facebook decided, well, okay, we're going to go fully native, build native applications for Android and for iOS, and we're going to need an API, right, to retrieve data for the native views. And they evaluated REST, but they saw there were some problems with that, and they looked like an opportunity in which they could do something a little bit better and create something new. Enter GraphQL. So it's a data query language developed by Facebook, as I've just said. They've used it internally since 2012, so it's fairly mature, fairly robust. The specs are pretty clean. It's been open source since July 2015, so I presume they've got a couple of pull requests. Relay was launched in August 2015, and they've done an open source specification for it. So you can create your own clients or your own server-side versions of it so that people can communicate to you. So think of it as ANSI SQL if you use that. But of course, there's going to be somebody else that implements it slightly differently just to annoy you, but that's beside the point. So there's some key concepts of GraphQL. That's hierarchical. So you can question documents from the top and documents inside that. It's product-centric. In other words, you can query your own database. So it's not saying that you have to do something specific for this. If you have objects in your database, in your system, you can query them with GraphQL. It's got strong typing, which is actually pretty good because it allows you to self-document quite precisely. You can do client-specified queries, so you can create your own functions within your client that produce very specific data. And it's also introspective, so it knows what it wants. It knows what it needs from you as a user when you're talking to it, which is very handy compared to REST, that you're like just looking at docs and passing those query strings in, right? That's essentially your day. I've just spent a week doing Auth0 integration, looking at docs and noticing that there's discrepancies between what they've written and what they've done. It would be nice if there was a way for it to just tell me, no, actually, you have to pass in this parameter. And this parameter does this. So let's look at some GraphQL queries. Can you guys see that? It's really tiny. But let's say I am asking, it's an open bracket, for a user with ID equals 1, as we were doing before. And in the curly braces, I say, just return me the name. Now, your JavaScript or JSON instincts might be tingling right now because there's no comma, there's no equals. It's kind of a simplified version of JSON, right? So you don't need to put something equals something, right? Each one of these is actually a function, but we'll talk about that later. So basically, I'm asking for a user ID equals 1, and just return me the name. And all that will return there is the name of the user. That's it. I can define the projection of what the data I want back. So in the second one, let's see if the laser pointer works. It works. No, not on the screen. Nope. So I'm now asking for user ID 1. Don't bring me anything about the user, but bring me all his friends, but only give me their names. Now, isn't this much better than getting that whole sheet of data back? All you'd get is an array of names, because we can define in our syntax that friends are an array. Even better, we can actually mix and match. So we can have, say, give me this user, just give me his age for some whatever reason, and tell me who his friends are, right? And this is even better. I can go to get me this user, actually get me their friends. Actually, I don't care about their friends. I only care about their dogs. I come from Greenwich. I have 2 massive dogs. All I care about is other people's dogs. And give me their names, because it's the only way I can actually know other people. I don't know their names, I know their dogs' names. So this is how that can work much better, right? So you can have variables going in, and I said a strong type. So you have this ideas of int, strings, booleans, etc., kind of simple numeric types. But you also can define objects, such as a post, such as an author, such as a comment. You can have input types into queries that input types in there. So you can have scalars of arrays, etc., of different types, enums like objects, etc. Let's have a little demo. So I'm doing this in Node. Do you guys write in Node? Will this be okay? I was going to do it in Cold Fusion, but you guys would probably hate me. So you can just, I'm going to make a little folder, hello GraphQL. I'll pretend to type. Yeah, there you go, cd GraphQL, npm initf, and then it gives you the normal stuff, right? So there we go, nothing under the covers. So for this little demo, I'm going to install Babel, which goes really quick. There you go, look at that, how quickly I installed that. Install Babel preset 2005, so I can write code nicely. Isn't that how quick? And then install GraphQL and save that, right? That's your usual workflow. So my presentation is kind of standard JavaScript. I'm an old developer. All this newfangled stuff kind of goes over my head, and you're just making work for yourself. But anyway, so I'm going to just import a whole bunch of stuff from GraphQL. Let's go through some of the stuff that we imported. And you can probably guess what it is. I'm importing all the different variable types, because I want to define them later on, right? So the first few is a list, an object type, an enum, GraphQL non-null, in other words, a required. It's a nice way to say required, non-null. A schema, which is going to be how we define, well, it's a schema, so how we define our objects and how they relate to each other. You can come in. And we import GraphQL itself. Okay, so once we've imported all of that, we can create an object. I'm going to call it a query. So this is like people asking stuff to my system, right? So it's like I'm going to answer to a query. His name is root queries because this is the root. In other words, a slash that goes in. This is the main query that can go in. It has a field called echo. So that's a function echo. That's the first function that you can call. So if you call echo, you'd call that. But I define what it returns, a GraphQL string, right? So the type is what it returns. I'm saying pass in an argument called a message, which is again is a type of a string, right? And then I have a function called resolve. Resolve actually does the work, and you can nest all of these. If you have different types, each resolver will say, I go and get myself. I go and get some data. I'm not doing this, I say client side, it's only like on a Node.js on my machine. It's not going to a server, so I'm kind of just playing around on the client side for this, right? And then I define my schema. So I say, this is the schema. These are the objects that I have and things that I have in it. So I put a query, is this query, the query that I've defined there. Everyone with me so far? Any questions? I don't have sleeves, so I'm not showing you anything up my sleeves. So once we've defined that, we can define a query, right? So the query will be return a structure with a received message, right? And call echo, passing a message called hello, right? So that's a string query you can see in there, right? Now I can pass it to GraphQL that asks for the schema, saying go and ask the schema, pass a query, and then when you've finally done it, output that out. So if I now run it, you'll get, here's the data, the received message said hello. Okay, so it went to the resolver, I passed some data to it, it resolved it, and it came back. I mean, that's all well and good, but we need to pass variables around, right? Because all programming is all about passing data around, right? So how am I going to pass some data into this? So what I can do is say the query is passing an input message with a $ input message, and the received message is this input message string. I don't want to get your screen dirty, I must not touch it again. Now if we call GraphQL, this is actually a long, I haven't quite found the answer for this, and maybe Jonas will tell me, but GraphQL has got like a whole bunch of variables before it actually passes the actual variables. It's got a whole bunch of arguments, right? It's got the schema, it's got the request string, which is a query, it's got the root value, and it's got like the context, so it knows in which context it is, so you can nest this stuff, so you can pass the context down if you're doing like recursion into the objects in the tree, right? So you can pass where you are in the tree. But I digress, you don't need to memorize that. So then you can pass the variables. Input message equals hello world. And well, it'll pass this input message into the get echo, and you get the same response back. But now I'm actually passing a variable to the function. But that's all well and good. But what we want, but I bet you what's in your head is like, okay, so you're doing this query to the server via get. How am I going to get any information back from it, right? And you want it from a data source or something, some database. How do we connect a database to this? I'm going to use something called Promised Mongo, which actually uses promises to interact with MongoDB. You all heard of MongoDB? It's been around for a little while. I'm going to connect it to my localhost database. I'm going to create an authors collection, and I'm going to, I don't have how many prizes with me, give someone a free beer if they figure out any changes on there. We're going to create something called a mutator, which is a great name. Mutations are a fantastic name for basically CRUD operations. So a mutator is something that changes the state of your database. I mean, we could have come up with millions of names, but they came up with mutator because it mutates the state of your database. So it's a delete, an update, or a create, right? So queries are basically questions to your database, so they don't change the state of it. Mutators actually mutate it. So this is fairly similar. You can see the whole thing here. We create a mutation. We say it's a graph object type. I know it's very small code. I'm trying to make it bigger. Which is name is mutations. It has a create author function. I don't know if it's, nope. At the top, which I say it returns an author, because I'm going to go into a database and create an author type. I have some arguments, one which is an ID, a name, and a Twitter handle, right? Make sense so far? And I say that the ID is a new graph non-null. In other words, I want this to be required. You can't pass a null value. And I want it to be a graph SQL string. I want the name to be, again, a non-null value. And I want it to be a string. And then I say a Twitter handle is going to be a graph SQL string. That's fine. It's like, you can be null. I don't require it. And then I have the resolver. The resolver is actually what does the work, right? So that's like the function, the callback, or whatever you want to call it. And I pass a value, and I say, create a new, let the author, and assign it the arguments. And then I do this. I return db.authors.insert. This is actually the MongoDB call, right? And then actually return it, so you probably can't see it. So this is is that better? Much better for you to see. So here's a function. It assigns the values that you're going to pass in, and you return that. Comes back out as the author. So before we actually can implement that, we've created a mutation, and before you had this idea of the schema, right? But we now have to add a mutation. You say, our mutation is how. How we want to change it, and we can list our different mutations that we're going to put in there. So you then go in, and basically you create an author, and there you go. You have your author. This is a little client called GraphQL. Graphical, how do you say it? It's meant to be graphical, but it's GraphQL, whatever, which is a great way to interact with your server once you're doing some development, so you can pass queries back and forth. I should have mentioned that earlier, because it's a nicer way than all the code that I've shown you. But this way you can actually pass in some data, and this is what you get returned. So the next thing is we can change the root query. So that's how I change the database, but now I want to get actual objects back out, right? Real objects. Like the first thing is, how do I do select star from my database? Isn't that the usual question you have? I have. So basically I'm doing return db.authors, which is the MongoDB, the collection authors. I'm going to say find and convert it to an array. In other words, go and get all of it back. So now if I call that, so I can do db.authors.name, goes to the database and automatically knows the shape of stuff and already returns the authors with a and just returns the name from the author, right? I bet not everyone here writes Node.js, and it would be great if this presentation was all about JavaScript and all about Node and stuff like that. But in fact, they've prepared libraries for nearly every single technology you can possibly think of. From JS to Scala to Python to Java. I've still got to try out the Java version of it so that I can integrate it with some of the stuff. PHP, Lua, and whatever you want. So basically, they're trying to push this as much as possible because it's a much simpler way to do APIs. I've listed a whole bunch of useful links, which you can take a picture of, or you can ask me for a slide, or I'll probably tweet this presentation at some point. Thank you. I'm now going to pass over the... I'll answer any questions, but I'm going to pass them all over to Jonas Schicklin, who's much better at this than me. But if you have any questions, shoot them over. Yes, sir.
How do you make sure someone doesn't just query bits of your database that you don't want?
Well, you put that in the code. This would be for your API, stuff that you are exposing anyway, right? So you can do authentication stuff anyway, right? So you will have the authenticated user. The same way that you do REST with like OAuth and tokens and however you're doing that.
What about if you've got a table with passwords? Someone passes you a GraphQL query and says,
show me that. Yeah. Right, well, in your... So, very simplistic example. db.authors.find was like a select star from database.
okay, yeah.
First off, I don't return the password. You do it here. This is server side, so you're never returning it. It's up to you to protect your data, and you'd only say, hey, to GraphQL, I make objects like this appear.
So and you make each piece individually available, and then the query code, the query GraphQL query, then goes and amalgamates that from what you made available.
Yeah, what you made available to GraphQL, and GraphQL says, hey, here was the query, this is the object you've given me, this is what they were asking for. So by the time it gets to GraphQL, it should not have passwords. So it's not a vector for SQL injection, but then again, I'm going to wait 5 minutes and someone's going to tell me they've done something like that. But it shouldn't be a vector for SQL injection.
Because GraphQL is sort of parsing what your full object structure and giving only what you need. What if the user we can't control wants everything?
Wants everything.
In that sense, how does that work?
It would be the same as what your API would have been without GraphQL.
Because in an old way of doing things, in REST-based things, because the endpoints themselves are different endpoints,
yeah.
You could sort of at that level, I know it's a lot more work to get it right, etc. But you can control them at each individual points. Hence, you could, if
Right. Well, the thing is, like, as you go through each object, you can do pagination, for example,
Yeah.
and things like that. So, kind of same practice as you would do with like standard ways of not returning the whole damn database.
If you've got a normal REST API and you want to slowly
Transition
convert
to
to GraphQL,
You-
are you able to kind of wrap parts of your current
Well,
API? Or
I presume that you've got a layer of your API, which is going to be like an Express app or something like that, right? So you could create another endpoint, which is your search,
Right.
and that's what you post
So
GraphQL
they
stuff.
okay, so you can still use your current API.
Yeah, you'd have your API running, and then you'd have like another endpoint, which is like the GraphQL endpoint, which is /search, for example, right? And that's what's going to start. That's more of an application side kind of stuff,
Yeah.
rather than how you implement it. But for example, this endpoint is the / endpoint in my app, which I don't have on this laptop.
So you do actually need the REST API there to begin with.
Not the REST API, your connection to the databases or whatever your data store or your business data, right? Because your REST API will generally be, I'm going to go and query the database, or I'm going to go and query this service layer to go and give me all of this, right? You still have that access to the service layer. This is just a way of then creating nice queries to you to send to the service layer and come back.
So you can just stick it in the middle, in between.
Yeah, it's like middleware.
Okay,
Like.
nice.
Any other? Yes, sir.
What about errors? Say you can't connect to the database, for example.
I don't know if there is a standard, but I've seen that you just return error objects. You could probably define an error object in your schema anyway. Or it's REST, 500 error.
Right, so you return a different format from what the client requested because it's an error. I guess that makes sense.
Well, most of REST is based on HTTP. So, like, if you have an error, you return 500, and you put the body as a rich object, you know, with like, here's your error message, but you're still getting a status code 500. So everything should be like status code based, and for example, mutations, for example. So later on, all the queries should be GET requests, right? All the mutations should be POST. So it only uses those two, if I remember right, but it still follows a lot of the REST protocols in the sense of like how you'd be doing this stuff. So it's not like a complete refactoring. It's just something that allows you to add richness and manageability to it.
All right. So thank you, Mark. So I've seen a lot of GraphQL introductions, and I've seen very few so thorough in compared to REST. So I think that was really good. I want to dive a bit more into what you could possibly use this evening if you wanted to get started. I personally was most excited about GraphQL based on me being a front-end developer. So I wanted to use GraphQL in my React apps that I develop. I've used Angular in the past, and GraphQL is really meant for front-end developers. It makes lives for front-end developers a lot easier. The hard part for me diving into GraphQL 1.5 years ago was that it was incredibly hard to, as a front-end developer, to get started with GraphQL. So first, you need to have a lot of experience building backends. There were not too many resources out there how to build your own GraphQL server. And at the same time, there was this concept of a backend as a service. So similar like Parse or Firebase. Who's used Parse or Firebase here? Right. So for me, it basically clicked a lot that you could apply the concepts around GraphQL to ideas like Firebase or Parse. And that is essentially what we've built. So that is a GraphQL backend as a service. And I want to quickly show you how you can get your own GraphQL backend within a couple of minutes. So I actually just have, I think, 2 more minutes. So let's do this. And that is, let me quickly log in. Or I could also just use your GitHub account. That's probably faster.
It's a trusted profile. Hello. Hi, Mark.
All right. So we're going to skip the onboarding. And I actually decreased the... That's a bit better. So what we have here is basically our visual interface. So let's quickly build a Twitter clone. So what I would do first for Twitter, I need a model called tweet. So let's create a model called tweet. And the tweet has always a field called text maybe. And there also every tweet has a location. So we need a location type. And a location has a latitude, which is a float, longitude, which is a float, and then we actually create a relation between these, that every tweet has always a location. And what we now have out of the box is a GraphQL, a fully fledged GraphQL API. So we can do something like all tweets. For every tweet, I want to get the text. So this is basically a modification of what Mark already showed. So this is a fork of GraphQL. We've expanded it with a couple of features, such as that you can have a history that works with real-time GraphQL called subscriptions, and a lot of nice features. So we can try to.
Open source?
Sorry?
Is it open source?
It is open source. Yeah. So here, for example, I'm trying to get all tweets. Of course, we don't have any tweets yet, but we also provide mutations out of the box. So what Mark previously showed, you can here do right away. So we can say here, create a tweet called Hello London. Let's get back to ID. We run that, try to query all tweets again, and there we have it. What we also can do is, what is super helpful, are nested queries. So here, for example, we've created the relation between a tweet and a location. So we can directly get the location of a tweet. Let's get its latitude and longitude. We can query that. Of course, this tweet doesn't have a location yet. What we can do is either create a location individually and associate them, or in one transaction, basically create a tweet and at the same time also create the location. So that's something like this. And if we query this now again, we should get 2 tweets and one has the location. So building all of this on your own is going to take you probably multiple weeks. And so we've built this for front-end developers to make it really easy to get started with GraphQL. It comes out of the box with all available GraphQL features at the moment. Even supports GraphQL subscriptions, which are not yet official. But I've yesterday given a talk about GraphQL subscriptions at Facebook together with the inventor of GraphQL. So I can also give you a sneak peek of how that looks like. So you can write something which is called a subscription. We listen for new tweets coming in. And for every tweet node, we are interested in the text and the ID. So we can run the subscription. If we create a new tweet, Hello London 2, then we basically get here on the right, we get in real time, get these updates. So something like this is super useful if you want to build chat applications or any kind of real-time applications. That is based on Apollo subscriptions. No, that's something completely new. Right. So this is just a really brief introduction of how you could get started with GraphQL on your own tonight. There are also a lot of CLI tools which I actually wanted to show, but I think we're running too short on time. But yeah, if you want to try that out on your own, you can just go to graph.cool. And if you need any help, we'll send you an invite to our Slack right away to get you started.